I don't talk about this often because I think it's important to be humble and to stay grateful. But just like I could learn lessons from your journey in life, I want to share some of the lessons I've learned in my journey in the hope that it helps you with your journey. So these are the 3 habits that allowed me to become a millionaire before I was 35 years old. And the first one is, for whatever reason, I've never been bothered much by what other people think. I don't feel a need to keep up with the Joneses. I don't feel a need to impress anybody. I'm very comfortable being me, just Azul. And there's going to be some people that like me. There's going to be other people that don't like me. But you know what? If I'm driving a fancier car, or I'm wearing a nicer shirt, or I have a nicer watch on, that's not going to make a difference, in my opinion, whether people like me or not, whether I'm accepted or not. And so I've been very blessed that I've never felt this need to keep up from a society standpoint with what maybe society is telling us who we should be. And because of that, I was very comfortable spending a lot less than what I earned. And so, habit number 1 is being free of trying to keep up with the Joneses, being free of lifestyle creep, being free of doing things because I wanted to impress other people. That's never been important to me. So that's habit number 1. Habit number 2, and actually the third habit here is really important, so stick with me. But the second habit was, I've always been fortunate that no matter how much money I was making, I was always able to spend less than what I earned. And that was true, when I was a high school kid and I had a lawn care business, and a couple of my friends worked for me actually. I looked at the math, and I think as a young person, we all kind of do this at some point in our life, and we ask, will I be able to take care of myself? When I leave home, will I be able to pay the bills? And even on this little lawn cutting business, I did the math. Now, I grew up in the Midwest in a low-cost place to live, but I did the math, and even at 14 or 15 years old, I said, you know what? I could survive on my own if I needed to. So that was a very modest income that I was making. Of course, my parents were putting a roof over my head and providing food, but even in that situation, I could have done that for myself if need be. And then in college, I lived a very modest lifestyle, as many of us do, but then when I graduated college and started working, right, like most people, your salary's down. You're a poor college student, or you're learning a trade and you're not making your full salary yet. And then you graduate and you get bumped up, right? And I was fortunate because I said, let's increase our lifestyle by 10 or 20% versus being a college student. I still shared an apartment with somebody when I was graduated college, and I kept my costs low. My first job was actually in a small town in Tennessee, so cost was very, very low, and I kept my spending low, and frankly, I just piled away a lot of money. Now, it's also important to enjoy the journey, and that's one of the things I talk about on my channel. So yes, I did a good job of spending less than what I earned, but I also allowed myself to have fun. One of the things I don't talk much on the channel on is when I was in my early 20s to early 30s, hang gliding was a big part of my life. Jumping off of hills, jumping off of mountains with what looks like a kite, a big kite. There's hang gliding and there's paragliding. At the time I did hang gliding. Eventually I would do both of those. But that was not an expensive sport. That was, you'd typically be in these remote locations. So I was able to spend a lot less than what I was earning. I was probably saving 20 or 30%, maybe even a little bit more of what I was making. So I didn't have a term for it, but many people would say what I was doing back then was the FIRE movement, the financially independent and retire early, and squirreling away a fair amount of money. But importantly, it did not feel sacrificial. Now, part 2 of this is, it's not just enough to save, but you also have to invest this money. And that's frankly where I made a mistake. I was too risk adverse early in my investing career. And frankly, the great financial crisis gave me a do-over. When the market came down, really it gave up 20 years of return. The S&P 500 from peak to trough during the great financial crisis was down 60%, 60%. And that gave my wife Linda and I a chance, gave us a do-over, a mulligan. It allowed us to redo 20 years of being too conservative and get to our long-term allocation. And let me share with you how important this is. If you have $100,000, just to illustrate the point, and you get 10% return on $100,000, and let's say time's on your side, right? I was a young person, and that $100,000 at 10% a year is going to take 25 years with putting in no additional money. Is going to take 25 years to turn into $1 million. But if you only get 5%, it's about double. It takes almost 50 years, 48 years to get to that same $1 million. And unfortunately, I was overly conservative early on. And so that erased a lot of the goodwill, a lot of the good work that I was doing. And I tell my clients now that getting the asset allocation right is so important. It can be the difference between, you can have two people, one person that saves 20%, which is really, really hard to do, and another person that only saves 10% or 7 or 8%. But you know what? The person that's saving 7 or 8%, if they've got the right asset allocation and things go in their favor, and the person that's saving 20% is putting that money in the bank, and you know, for a long time we got very little interest on what we put in the bank. So those two people, actually the person saving less might end up having more money at the end of the day because they got their asset allocation right. So that's rule number 2. The habit number 2 that helped me was I spent less than I earned, and then I invested it. And mea culpa, in hindsight, I should have invested it more aggressively. And then the third one that made all the difference in the world, and admittedly I'm biased, but as a 22-year-old, I had a financial plan put together by a fee-only financial advisor. They didn't even have a term for it back then, but this was somebody that charged me a flat rate to put together a financial plan. He was a fiduciary to me the entire time, gave me a game plan. Basically, I said I wanted to have $1 million by the time I was 35 years old. That was my goal. I had 13 years to get there. He gave me a plan and said, this is what you need to do in order to get there. Unfortunately, I didn't follow all of his advice. I probably would have got there soon. I definitely would have got there sooner if I had followed all of his advice. And when I was 22 years old, was shortly after I turned 22, we had Black Monday in 1987, where the market dropped like 25% in one day. So it was maybe 6 months after that I was putting that plan together, and that drop was still fresh in my mind. Now, admittedly, the market rebounded very quickly. By year end, it looked like just a blip. By year end, it was Black Monday in October. I think it was October 7th or October 8th. And by year end, the market was back up to where it was before that Black Monday. But that left a mark, that left an impression on me and caused me to be overly conservative, and probably cost me 5 years. I probably would have become a millionaire at 30 instead of 35 if I had invested my money, if I'd allocated it for what was appropriate for somebody in their early 20s, which for me, this is not financial advice, but for me, the right amount to have invested probably would have been 100% stocks, which I believe my financial advisor told me to do. So it's one thing to go to a financial advisor, it's another thing to actually follow their advice, but you've got to do what feels right for you as well. You've got to be able to stay the course, and we need to make good decisions along the way, which is why I made this video up here. 8 things to stop doing in your 50s and 60s in order to enjoy your journey more. I'll see you in that video. Bye-bye.